The town of Dry Gulch was not the sort of place that drew strangers. It was small, sun-baked, and forgotten, tucked between jagged hills that carved shadows into the valley below. Dust curled in the wind like tiny ghosts, wrapping around the wooden facades of the saloons, general stores, and the lone bank, and settling on the boardwalks that creaked under each step. The people who lived here were as weathered as the buildings themselves, men with faces burned to a leathery bronze, women whose hands were calloused from endless labor, children who ran barefoot and fearless across the hard-packed earth. And today, the usual hum of mundane life was punctuated by a rare, electric tension, the kind that traveled like static through the air when something unusual arrived in town. The auction block had been hastily erected in the center of Main Street, a rough platform of splintered wood, more a stage for curiosity than a proper marketplace. The auctioneer, a gaunt man named Whitaker, with thin spectacles that slipped down his nose and a voice that carried the practiced ring of authority, stood poised above it all. His gavel, worn and darkened with years of use, rested against his hand, ready to strike, and his eyes scanned the growing crowd with the eagerness of a man who knew something sensational was about to unfold. Rumors had spread across the county like wildfire, whispers of the strange and remarkable item that was to be offered today, a subject of awe and fear alike, and now the townspeople had gathered, some out of curiosity, some out of dread, and some simply because life in Dry Gulch had grown unbearably slow. The object of their attention stood at the center of the platform. She was not loud, not gaudy, not demanding in any way, yet she commanded the attention of every soul present. She was tall, taller than most women in town, with shoulders square and posture rigid, yet her movements hinted at a restless energy coiled beneath her skin. Her hair, dark and unruly, tumbled down her back in waves that caught the sun, glinting in shades of bronze and black as it shifted with the wind. Her eyes were a startling contrast, sharp, vivid, and penetrating, the color of storm clouds before a thunderstorm, flickering with intelligence and a sort of wildness that seemed almost tangible. Some in the crowd avoided her gaze, as though their very souls could be read if they lingered too long. Children watched with wide, fascinated eyes, while their mothers tugged at their sleeves, whispering cautions that went unheeded. Whitaker cleared his throat, his thin frame straightening as he prepared to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice firm and deliberate, "today we have a rare opportunity. What you see before you is not your typical property or livestock. She is special, unique, and today, she is offered for half price. Who among you will bid?" A ripple passed through the crowd, subtle yet palpable. Men shifted uneasily in their boots, hands twitching near their revolvers out of habit rather than intent. The women exchanged glances that were equal parts fear and fascination. No one spoke. Whitaker's gaze swept the gathering once more, his expression a mixture of impatience and barely concealed excitement. He had seen hesitance before, but the reaction he encountered now was something different, an almost physical recoil, a reluctance that bordered on superstition. "She is, well," Whitaker continued, as though trying to find the right words to describe something indescribable. "She is untamed, and perhaps difficult to understand. That is why she is offered at half the usual rate. Consider this a rare bargain, if you dare." A murmur ran through the crowd, a low tide of speculation. Some whispered of curses, some of unmatched skill, and some simply of stories half remembered and half imagined. One old man muttered about his cousin in a town far west, who had once owned such a creature, only to find it was impossible to control. Another woman shook her head, clucking in disapproval, while a younger girl tilted her head, intrigued by the very mystery that scared her elders. The sun climbed higher in the sky, beating down on the wooden platform and the gathered faces. Sweat beaded on foreheads, and the scent of dust, sweat, and leather mingled in the air. The tension became almost tangible, a weight pressing down on the assembly. Whitaker's gavel hovered for a moment over the edge of the platform. "Half price, folks. Who will make the first bid?" Still nothing. The silence deepened, stretching and twisting, a living thing that seemed to press in from all sides. People shifted nervously, kicking up small clouds of dust as their eyes darted from one neighbor to another, as though looking for courage in the collective. A horse whinnied somewhere down the street, a sharp, abrupt sound that cut through the quiet and made several heads snap in that direction. Even the dogs that had wandered out from the alleys sat perfectly still, sensing the strange energy in the air. Time seemed to stretch. Whitaker cleared his throat again, louder this time. "Half price. Who'll take her? She won't remain here forever. A few brave souls stepped forward, hesitant, only to stop mid-stride as her gaze swept over them. It was not a glare, not a threat, it was something subtler and far more unsettling. It was the knowledge that she could see everything about them, the weaknesses, the fears, the unspoken thoughts, and some instinct inside them screamed that this was not something they could control. Each would be bitter retreated, muttering excuses about other matters, about lack of coins, about being called elsewhere. From the back of the crowd, a young boy nudged his father. "Pa," he whispered, voice trembling with excitement, "she looks different. Can she talk?" The father's hand tightened on the boy's shoulder. "Don't you be startin' anything foolish," he said sharply, though even he could not hide the unease flickering across his face. "Some things are better left alone." The boy's eyes never left her. She shifted slightly on the platform, the motion graceful, controlled, yet carrying the energy of something untamed. The platform seemed almost too small for her presence, as if the wood itself feared being broken under the weight of what she carried with her, a wild vitality that refused to be caged. Whitaker's voice rose, sharper now, tinged with desperation. "Half price, folks. She's worth every cent, and more. Who will bid?" Still silence. A wind picked up, carrying dust and the scent of the nearby hills, and with it came a subtle shift in her posture. She lifted her chin slightly, a small gesture, and the crowd instinctively recoiled, as though some unseen barrier had been breached. Children gasped softly, clutching at their mothers' skirts. Even the adults, hardened by years in a land where hardship was normal, felt a ripple of unease. It was then that the first whispers began to form, rising above the general murmur of the crowd. "I've heard of her," said one, voice low and urgent. "They say she can't be tamed. She's dangerous," another replied, shaking his head. "Better left to herself." The crowd seemed to grow tighter, the air more stifling. People began to edge back, unsure if fascination or fear should guide them. Whitaker's hands gripped the gavel tighter, knuckles whitening, yet he continued to urge them forward, calling for a bid with growing frustration. "Half price, folks. Who dares?" Minutes passed like hours. The sun beat relentlessly, and a bead of sweat ran down Whitaker's temple. Finally, just as the auction seemed it would end without a single offer, the saloon doors creaked open. A hush fell immediately, as though the building itself had altered the rhythm of the day. A figure leaned against the frame, his hat pulled low, dust covering his shoulders and boots. His posture was relaxed, casual, almost indifferent, yet there was a steadiness in his gaze that set him apart from the jittering crowd. He walked forward slowly, deliberately, eyes fixed on her with an intensity that matched her own. Every whisper in the crowd seemed to die, replaced by a collective holding of breath. Whitaker's eyebrows shot up in surprise, and the platform seemed to grow smaller under the weight of anticipation. The man's hand lifted, calm, unhurried. "I'll take her," he said. His voice was low but carried, steady and sure, without hesitation or fear. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Murmurs swelled into a roar of speculation, disbelief, and fear. Some turned away, unable to watch the scene unfold. Others leaned in, compelled by the courage, or recklessness, of the lone cowboy. Whitaker's jaw tightened, a mix of relief and astonishment crossing his features. The gavel struck the platform with a definitive thwack, sealing the transaction. Even as the deal was finalized, the air remained thick with tension. The cowboy extended a hand toward her, and she studied it for a moment, the faintest of smiles tugging at her lips. It was a small acknowledgement, yet it carried promise and challenge in equal measure. Then, with a fluid motion, she stepped down from the platform, leaving the hushed crowd behind. The townspeople watched, uncertain if they had witnessed courage or madness. Whispers continued to swirl, questions forming and dissolving in the heat of the day. Some feared the consequences of such a pairing. Others admired the bravery, though few would admit it aloud. But one thing was clear to all who saw them: the day in Dry Gulch had shifted. Something wild and untamed had entered their midst, and no one would forget the sight of the lone cowboy who dared reach out first. The dust swirled around their departing figures, sunlight glinting off the edges of the platform, casting shadows that seemed to dance like spirits in the heat. And somewhere in the distance, the wind carried a promise that this meeting, so seemingly ordinary yet charged with latent energy, would change the town forever.